All right, everybody, welcome back to the CrossFit Rife podcast, where we talk about the pursuit of health and fitness, health and happiness through CrossFit. Where can you find this? On the interwebs. My vow is to have these done and on the internet, on iTunes, before Christmas. YouTube has proven to be much easier, and they're on the website. But yeah, today, so I'm super stoked about this one because this one I think is going to be highly educational for a lot of people. And it's something that's a really hot topic right now, at least within the CrossFit community, and not just the CrossFit community, just society in general. So Ashley Roberts is with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is the most reserved I've ever seen you. I'm not really sure what to do.
This is the professional Ashley Roberts.
Yeah, it's freaking me out. I'm not really sure how to handle this. But no, so you've been CrossFitting for a while, but just to give you guys a little teaser, I'll talk about some things. You are a type 1 diabetic.
Yep, been since I was 8 years old.
Yep, so I think that's an interesting topic in and of itself. Like, how does one manage that, particularly who does CrossFit? But also formal education and a lot of background as a paramedic and a firefighter. So not only is she been on the patient side of this, but also on the care provider side of this as well. So, and there's a lot of what I think misinformation floating around about that, and a lot of just misunderstanding about type 1, type 2 treatment, what standard of care is, and all that stuff. So, yeah, let's jam, because I have no doubt we're going to have zero problems burning an hour on this. But thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Give us a little bit of your background. Like, tell us about yourself. What's your story?
So I've been type 1 diabetic since I was 8 years old. I was diagnosed very fortunately because I had a mother who was a practitioner who worked at the Diabetes Institute in Norfolk. So when she saw me with insatiable thirst and constant urination throughout the night, it was very much apparent warning signs. So I went and got an A1C, which is your standardized 3-month baseline testing for diabetics. That's how they diagnose everybody, called a hemoglobin A1C. At the time, it was actually a blood draw. Now it's just a finger stick. Long story short, they said, you're definitely diabetic.
So for those people that don't know A1C or much about diabetes, what they would consider normal, maybe something like between 5.5 to 6 when you get your A1C back, correct?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you would be in the low 4s. Ideally, as they talk about blood sugar ranges for people, they're looking at anything between 60 and maybe 95 on the high end. A normal person, which is a terrible word, I guess, to say in society now, but
yeah.
The normalcy that they're looking for, if you, Fern,
not sick, we'll
right,
call it.
yeah. If you, Fern, had a blood sugar of 135, they would have expected you to have a very carb-laden meal. So all of a sudden, then having a child or a young person who's diagnosed as diabetic, they would say, okay, you have been well over the 150, more like in the 200 ranges over the past 3 months. You've been showing these signs and symptoms, which would, like I said, would be your body trying to purge sugar from your system. Because when you consume carbohydrates and they're not able to be actually utilized by your cells, they end up just kind of floating around your bloodstream, which gets processed by your kidneys, a little AMP for the people out there, gets processed by your kidneys, and then you become thirsty because that filtration organ needs to flush it out.
Yeah.
So that's what was happening to me as a child. And it's very, very common that's how they diagnose most people. And
I don't remember what the figure is, but do you know off the top of your head what the A1C, where they're like, you're diabetic? I want to say it's like 8.
I don't know what the actual...
I don't remember. Good book, side story, is The Diabetes Code by Dr. Jason Fung. It's an amazing book for the layperson about diabetes and how it's treated. But okay, anyway, so...
I was saying another really awesome book that I've been metabolizing through, and it's dry, so it's difficult, but is Dr. Richard Bernstein. He's who I look at now as a
what's the book?
I'm trying to think of the title, but I can't right off the top of my head. But either way, his whole foundation is all about solving what the problems are and our deficiencies versus responding to conventional American diets and so forth, and trying to treat on the back end. Because most of the time now with diabetes, we're always chasing down the disease versus handling
just
the disease.
treating it. We're trying to manage it so that it doesn't get worse, which is actually
we're trying
not
to
a
chase
thing,
it. Yeah.
Okay, so then, so a lot of people don't even know what that's like. So what's it like to grow up as a type 1 diabetic?
Well, first and foremost, I know the stigma in our community now is nobody gets left off the field and everybody gets to play and so forth. But I very much was guarded with my diabetes and not telling people. Been an athlete my whole life, but as soon as a coach or somebody found out I was the diabetic kid, they looked at me like I was the sick kid. And I remember being very self-conscious of that. So I wouldn't tell people I was diabetic. I would just get, sweaty and kind of uncomfortable. And I was very self-serving, where you handle your stuff on the back end on your own. You don't ask for help. It's very much keep it a secret.
And were your parents cool with that too? Or
I'm kind of the oddity where both my dad and my brother are diabetic, so we are one of these
both type 1 as well.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
We're a medical outlier in the community. Most practitioners would say it's impossible to have type 1 diabetics all that closely in a family, but we live and breathe.
Yeah.
Swear in God.
Yeah. Okay. What sports did you play growing up?
So I was a basketball player, I was a lacrosse player, and I was a swimmer.
Okay, so
every single season.
So all sports that have, high glycolytic output.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's hard for you to imagine, but I was a bit of a hyper child.
That is not hard for me to imagine at all. Managing that daily as a kid. I mean, it's weird because I would try to imagine like trying to go from not having to manage it and then having to, wear a monitor all day, check blood levels all the time. But when you start doing that, is it weird to you when you have to do that growing up? Or do you just kind of like assume the role as a type 1 diabetic and you're like, I don't really know anything else?
Yeah. So, maybe kind of a fortunate thing for me was growing up with my dad being type 1 diabetic. We didn't have a lot of like sugar-laden foods in the house. Not that my dad's ever been a, beacon diabetic, if you will. But I don't remember not having a Diet Coke. When people talk about, I couldn't drink a Diet Coke, it doesn't taste like that's all I knew.
Meaning like it was always in the house.
Right.
Got it.
So I was never a kid who opened the refrigerator and had juices and stuff like that. Okay. So that wasn't a huge change, but definitely like the things I can think of as I remember is elementary school having like kid parties. There was always cake and ice cream and all that stuff. And once again, I used to get really angry when the moms or the teachers would then take over the role of managing me because I don't necessarily love getting told what to do. So when they'd be like, "Oh, you can't have this. We got this for you," which you tell a little kid at a party that they can't have cake and can't have cake, ice cream, and candy, but everybody else does. I was like, no wonder I don't tell you people.
Yeah. Okay. And then how long does that last for before people are just kind of like, okay, you're not going to drop dead on us?
I always had a problem where I was fighting the comforts of a system. Like even in high school, they wanted me to report to the school nurse every time and tell her my blood sugar and tell her my corrections and tell her my diabetes management action plan. And I always looked at the practitioners that were supposed to be managing me as being more ignorant than me. That could be a bit of a problem.
Even in your youth?
Yeah. So that can be a problem when you're 13, 14 years old and you're very combative to someone trying to manage you.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of tough because I think it's a weird dynamic because I do think they're trying to do the right thing.
Right.
I just think it comes from a place of good that is also happens to be ignorant.
Well, for me, I always looked at it as people trying to tell me what to do that didn't know what they were doing. And they looked at it from a fear factor. So that being said, I mean, it was no harm, no foul, but I became the kid that was always in trouble because I would would kind of play their game for like a week to make them go away. And then I would hide my insulin in my locker and I was always in trouble for something because, surprise, surprise, middle school and high school doesn't want you having needles in your backpack and locker.
I can't imagine why.
No.
Yeah, that's weird. Any scares or anything like that growing up, or like you medical
I had a couple
emergencies?
different times that the one that always comes to mind is I was probably in middle school time frame. I went to my friend's house at the time. It was my first time ever spending the night at her house. We went for this long walk with her mom, and I had pizza.
Like in the middle of the night?
No.
Okay. I was like,
No,
that is weird. Yeah.
They were
you had other
like
things to be worried about that
Yeah,
point.
her family was all about trying to live healthy. So me and her name was Priscilla. Me and Priscilla had just devoured this large pizza. And pizza for diabetics is always a problem because you have this glycemic spike with carbohydrates, and then you have this long-term pullout with the fats.
Yep.
Long story short, I front-loaded my insulin too heavy. So thinking I was going to have more sugar in my system than I did.
Is that something you had to do regularly? So like you're front loading for a meal that's coming up?
Absolutely.
Do you still do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're front loading your insulin. You think, okay, this is going to be the correction factor. And I had just done the calculations wrong. Most all type 1 diabetics, that is your single factor in life that's a downfall, is your calculations. So long story short, we've been on this walk and my blood sugar started dropping rapidly. And the scary part with blood sugars dropping is your brain only functions on glucose.
Yep.
So if there's a drop in glucose in your system, your brain literally shuts off. So that is exactly what happened, is my brain literally shut off. And they said I just started being all ditzy
Weird.
and I don't remember any of it, but yeah. And I remember waking up, coming to in the ambulance, and I couldn't actually talk. That's another common thing when you get your blood sugars too low. Forming words, just.
Yeah, human language.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around that, around
I was about 14 or 13.
having to do math before I eat.
Yeah.
Which probably sounds kind of stupid because we're always telling people to, calculate their food, measure their food and all that stuff. But this is a little different. I mean, it's a little bit more intense, because we're trying to tell people, hey, just weigh and measure your food so you can just know what it is that you're eating. You're calculating insulin input so that insulin can deal with the glucose that you're about to intake. That's a little bit more.
Yeah, you're definitely dealing with a multi-variable equation. And that's where my push, when I talk to people about managing diabetes now, is take some of the variables out of your life. Diabetes can be a major stressor when you're constantly having highs and lows. You're worried, do I have a snack on hand? Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be okay to handle myself? Because the last thing I want to do is have another emergency issue. Then your other factor is, if I don't take the right amount of insulin, my blood sugar is always high, am I literally causing permanent damage in the long term? Or am I just moody and fatigued? Because high blood sugar will put you easily into depression and just anger, and just you feel like you're just ill. You don't feel good. Mm-hmm. So, not to mention, nobody wants to constantly be drinking water and feeling dehydrated and peeing all the time. I don't think anybody's ever been like, yeah, give me that day. So.
No, that would be insanely aggravating.
Right. And then you just feel tired and you can't get anything done. And every little thing annoys you.
Yeah, that sounds like the worst day ever all the time. Okay.
So 20 plus years of that day.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have it somewhat under wraps now?
It's always a work in progress because different things in your life can change. Puberty, huge change for diabetics. You think about your endocrine system is diabetes. Now you throw in extra hormones in the mix, and those hormones are going to affect your body's insulin resistance and just overall metabolism. And so things get spicy, as they say, on a regular basis, that you're constantly having to adapt. There's no single formula that will always work with diabetes. But what I said, I digress. The variables, if you remove the variables. So at its fundamental, type 1 diabetes is that my body does not produce insulin. Mm-hmm. Whatever the reasoning is, my immune system attacks these beta cells in my pancreas, and it says, okay, your beta cells, they don't work because you have antibodies for them. So as simple as I can be, because I'm not a biology teacher or a doctor, you consume a piece of bread. Mm-hmm. As soon as that bread hits your saliva, your body says, carbohydrates, we're going to start using it instantly. You have a 2-part system for your insulin response. Phase 1 is your stored insulin in your pancreas. Your beta cells say, hey, we made this extra insulin, we're holding it. Mm-hmm. As soon as your saliva gets those carbs, it releases it. Me, diabetic, those carbs hit my saliva. There's no stored insulin. I don't produce it. So whatever insulin's in my body from shots or from the pump, that's all I have. So that's where my problem comes into play, is people talk about now with keto, carbohydrates, whatever low carb diet fads are out there, and people are really anti whatever. cannot apply it to diabetics because my body, it's not that I can't process carbs, it's that my body doesn't have the keys to unlock the cells to use the carbs. So the carbs become a negative thing in my body versus a positive thing for IgE and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. So for those,
Or ATP.
yeah. So for those folks who are not familiar with the difference, right? So let's just distinguish between type 1, type 2. Type 1, you can't do anything about that. You're born with that. Type 2.
Type 1 is diagnosed anybody under the age of 40 that your immune system, for whatever reason, has produced antibodies that have destroyed your beta cells in your pancreas. Your pancreas has a couple different functions, primarily known for insulin production, but it also produces glycogen, which allows your liver to release stored carbohydrates. So it has a couple different things that it does, but in this conversation, we'll talk about the insulin part.
Yeah. So, and it's a little different than type 2,
Right.
in the sense that type 2 falls more in the bucket of chronic disease, and we could look at that as like a lifetime of ignorant or just poor decisions has caused your body to shut down, essentially resulting in the same scenario.
Right.
One, my body in type 1 just physically does not produce insulin anymore. Type 2 is a little bit different because now there's actually too much insulin in the bloodstream because basically those cells you were just talking about, they're full, but I'm still putting a lot of carbohydrates in the system. So now I've got hyperinsulinemia, which leads to a whole bunch of other stuff. So
yeah, fundamentally type 2 would be that you have so much resistance in your body that you compare two people, like you have the elite athlete, say we'll just make up numbers, their insulin output is 1. You have the type 2 diabetic who has the ability to produce insulin, but because of the resistance factors in their body, whether it's fatty organs and so forth, they're producing, say, a level 3 or 4. So you're producing 1 as an elite athlete. They're producing 3 or 4, just trying to compensate to get back to baseline. So what happens to their pancreas is it's like any other machine. If you buy a washing machine and you expect it to last 10 years with normal wear and tear, but you run that washing machine constantly all day long, that wear and tear might make that machine shut down in 3 years.
Yeah.
That happens to the type 2 diabetic. Their pancreas just says, look, I'm done. I can't keep up.
Yeah. It's an interesting, and in the book, The Diabetes Code, he talks about that and this is kind of just splitting hairs on terminology or phrases. He talks about, to some extent, the way it's been described is somewhat misleading when we say that somebody is insulin resistant. And he says, if you think about it in terms of like a train, right? So your cell is the train, right? So normally in a train, you would say that I put passengers on, which is my insulin putting glucose into the cell for storage later, right? To say it was resistant would mean that if the train came by and it was empty, that we were just not letting people on. When in fact what's actually happening is the cell is full. It has a finite amount of space. It's an actual thing, and it's not actually resistant. There's just no space, right? So that insulin and that glucose just starts flowing around in the system. So and again, it's just another way to describe it for people to kind of understand it, is that it is referred to as insulin resistant, but that's not. If you were to think about the word resistant, it's not really the case. It would be like saying that train is packed with people, and you were saying, well, they're resisting letting passengers on. And you're like, well, no. People can't physically get on the train. So, and that's kind of the way you would look at type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, and then there's a whole lot of other problems with the fact with type 2 diabetes. Like insulin is one of if not the strongest anabolic kind of agents we have out there. So insulin doesn't just control diabetes. It forces you to produce new cells. Most easily and most readily, it produces fat cells.
Yeah.
It also causes hunger. So if you're a type 2 diabetic, you have insatiable hunger. You're constantly hungry because instead of the athlete who has the insulin at 1, you now have an insulin at a 3 or 4,
yeah,
and it's dumping in your body at all times. So your body's saying, give me more, but you just destroyed a whole plate of food.
Yeah.
You don't need the food. And everything you're consuming goes into storage because, once again, the insulin is telling your body, hey, store this fat. So it becomes this snowball effect for a lot of people. And, the biggest thing we can do is diet control for that situation.
Okay, which is a perfect segue because that's what I want to talk about now is
That's what I'm known for.
yeah, there you go. Is that what you're known for? I don't know. You would definitely not fall into the bucket of what I would consider your average everyday type 1 diabetic. As far as like physical activity, just in general. You are doing CrossFit how many days a week?
At least 5.
At least 5. Firefighter for, you're not currently doing that anymore, but how long are you a firefighter?
8 years.
8 years as a firefighter and CrossFitting. So extremely physical job, number one. And then your
I even did ocean rescue
extracurricular
for 10 years. That's 12 hours a day out in the sun and swimming.
Yeah, as a lifeguard. Yeah. So so like what I would consider way outside the spectrum of what we're going to see most type 1 diabetics doing. How are you able to do that, or were you able to do that?
So
and still able to do that?
I think my biggest push in life, and it has a lot to do with my personality. What kind of got me here is I am extremely motivated by the statement, "You can't do that."
That's fair.
So growing up, as we said, I got really frustrated with being told what I could and couldn't do all the time. So I learned how to, in my mind, beat the system. So in that situation, I had to be very much in control of Ashley, because if I gave anybody else the opportunity to control Ashley, Ashley couldn't do what she wanted to do. So that's where I've kind of played in with my own medical management. And it kind of gets me a little bit in trouble at times with doctors and practitioners because I make them uncomfortable, but it's also been what's been my driving force in my life. So that being said,
it's kind of hard to argue with, though, don't you think, where you have somebody who's bucking standard care or standard protocol, but as I was just saying, is exceeding, forget type 1 diabetics, just exceeding general activity levels of the average person by large margins.
Yeah.
Right? How does that conversation even go? Like, I know how it would go for me, and it probably wouldn't be great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit difficult because I think that also with the standard of care, and we've talked about this before, is very much a responsive standard of care, and I don't think that is acceptable for my life because, crazy concept, I would like to live a long, healthy life, not just kind of accept the fact that my body was the healthiest it's ever going to be yesterday. So that's kind of what they always deal with. But moving forward, how I've handled it, it's all been about adjusting your insulin and adjusting your food. Those are the only two things I can control about my life.
Specifically, what does that look like?
So
I guess currently, and then what has it looked like over time?
Okay, awesome. So currently I fully support every single diabetic getting some kind of continuous glucose monitor, CGM for short, for the cool community. And what that does is it lets me have a little monitor sub-Q that monitors just your glucose relativity and interstitial fluid. In all fancy terms, it just lets you chart and graph over a continual 10-day period. What is your blood sugar doing?
Is that something you wear all the time? Mm-hmm. Okay, because that's the one.
I have it on my hip now, but it's fantastic because it goes on my phone. You have alarms that go off, but it lets you know, when is my blood sugar going up? When is it going down? Like, how can I adjust accordingly? Because your body has times where your pancreas says produce insulin, or your pancreas says dump carbs.
Yeah. And
your body adjusts accordingly. I have to work like that on my own. So everybody should be on some kind of CGM, if not just for the curiosity sake of just knowing what your body's doing.
Learning.
Yeah, because it's like anything else. I'm sure you've had plenty of girlfriends, but no two girlfriend was exactly the same. There's no two diabetics that are exactly the same. Everybody's got their own, sticks and issues.
Okay. I get it. I haven't had a lot of girlfriends. But
okay. Sorry.
Couple. Enough to understand the concept.
I've done the science here.
Yeah.
But that being said, so with the CGM, and then I'm on what they call pump therapy now, which allows me to manually recreate what my pancreas does, but not exactly. So like we had talked about with the 2 phases of insulin response. Phase 1 is stored insulin. Mm-hmm. I will never have stored insulin. It's just impossible for me to have because my beta cells don't do it. So I can only operate on the phase 2 cycle. So that being said, with the pump, it allows me to.
So I just want to clear that up for people, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to try to paraphrase that or put it in a more layman's terms. You can only have enough insulin in the system to facilitate basically the exact amount of glucose that you put in the system as well.
Right.
So you can't be like a normal person where if I have excess, insulin just pushes it into the cell, and if I need it, glucagon pulls it out. Right. So you are constantly having to have this perfect marriage of where like there is no up and down.
Yeah, so there's two different numbers that they play with. Is called your basal and your bolus. Once again, I'm trying not to get too deep in the weeds here. Your basal insulin rate is going to be your body produces a steady stream of insulin from your beta cells. I have to have my pump do that. Now, I look at it in like 3-hour blocks, like early in the morning at like between 3 and 6 a.m. You're called like the dawn effect or something to that, whatever. For some reason, your liver dumps sugar in your body. It just does it. So that being said, your body does it, my body does it. Well, I have to adjust my insulin to that because otherwise I wake up with really high blood sugar, which is detrimental. And then you might taper your insulin off in the morning, and then maybe late at night you start bringing it up again. So I'm constantly having to have this flux with my pump. It's fantastic because once again, the CGM can tell you where do you need to ebb and flow in insulin. Then the bolus is going to be what I take with food, and that's where we talk about the food pairing. And in the simplest terms, if I eat a ton of carbs, probably 80% of the time I'm wrong. That being said, I'm either
with the bolus number?
Yeah, I'm either going to always overcorrect or always undercorrect, because they have this magical number that you play with your entire life, and the longer you're diabetic, the number fluctuates, and whether you have hormones or you're upset or you're pregnant, the number's always different. So my correction factor right now is approximately 13 to 1. 13 grams of carbohydrates to 1 unit of insulin. But everybody's number is different. Like my dad's 10 to 1. My brother's 13 to 1 as well. So it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So, but if you just take the carbohydrates out of the system, proteins are going to also make your blood sugar go up. But it's on a lot longer stream. So when you think of, would you rather be able to correct a little bit over a long period, or do you want to have to make a decision right now? And that's where it comes down to, for me, if I choose foods that are not high glycemic index or high carbohydrates, and I just eat vegetables, which have carbs, and but they're just longer. Yeah,
and high glycemic foods, for those that don't know, is just foods that have a lot of sugar in them.
Right, like whether it's bread, pastas, rice, sweet potatoes, there's all these magic foods that we've been marketed to that are supposed to be super good for you, because I can even eat a handful of cashews and my blood sugar goes up. And people are going to be like, cashews
It's interesting, that's a fat.
Yeah, but cashews still have carbs.
Yeah, it's true.
They're in everything.
So what does your nutrition look like currently?
So I've pretty much been, and it's always a game with me, because sometimes I'll go back and forth with trying to eat like what they would call a normal person's diet. And I was actually trying that for a couple months, and I was failing miserably at it, because once again, I was having these highs and lows.
So what did normal person, in air quotes, diet look like? What was that for you?
Where I was trying to eat around 140 to 150 grams of carbs a day. But the only way that I can make these systems work is by counting. So when you talk about having to be cognizant of what you're eating, you're trained as a diabetic to count carbs or to look at your foods. I do it with technology using like a My Macros app, or you can use MyFitnessPal, and you look at your overall food intake and you say, okay, this meal is 56 grams of carbohydrates. My pump lets me think quicker, because it says your insulin on board, which is going to be your basal rate, and your carbohydrates based off your current blood sugar. Here's your bolus.
Yeah. Okay. So you said 140 grams? Not a ton, but I would venture to say the average. I know the average American consumes about 156 pounds of sugar annually, which means they're eating And that's, so the crazy thing about that is that's the average. That means the people, you have to offset that, right? I mean, that means there's people that are eating 300 pounds of sugar a year to get to 156. That is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But going back to where I was going with that thought is that...
What was it? Like a can of soda has like 40...
A Dr. Pepper, I know this, has 54 grams of sugar in it.
There you go.
and I think a Coke has like 48 or something like that. So that would be just over 33% of your total consumption for a day.
Yeah, and there's people that drink 6 Cokes a day.
Easily. And that's where I was going with that. 140, while not a lot, it would be high for a type 1 diabetic, but still way under the norm for what we would see in modern westernized diet.
Yeah.
Like most people are probably pushing 300-400.
Yeah, I feel the best. And like I said, you're going to get carbs from everything, but I feel the best personally when I'm under 100 grams of carbs. And, you know, you're going to have dietitians that are like, oh, you're an athlete, you can't do that. Now, I don't do keto well. You know, the keto diet, they say you got to be under, like, I think it's like 30 or 50. That doesn't work for me because it's just...
I did some math on the keto diet yesterday, and so you can't just eat keto, right? So let's just clear that up. Like if you are
There's
eating...
not a keto that I can eat?
Well, you could eat ketones, but what I'm saying is a lot of people are like, well, I'm doing keto. Well, you're not doing keto unless you're in ketosis. Right. So there's just people who are just smashing a lot of fat, which is oddly not even enough. So I think the ratio, this is not exact, but like you would have to be consuming somewhere to the tune of 75 to 80% of your macronutrients via fat to get into ketosis.
I mean, it sounds delicious.
Great. I mean, but just you're eating a stick of butter at every meal.
Here's my only problem with ketosis. I don't care how great you look naked. If your breath smells like a mouthful of nasty, dirty pennies, I don't want to make out with you.
That's fair.
So you keep your ketosis in the magazines, and I will look at pictures of you.
That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, I could see how that would not work. But yeah, the keto thing. I think the keto thing has come to light because it actually is really effective to treat chronic disease in a lot of scenarios, because basically it is the massive pendulum swing to the other direction of people who are dealing with type 2 diabetes or hyperinsulinemia or anything that has to do with overconsumption of carbohydrates. So we're just going to swing the pendulum the other way. They still need to get the calories in that they need, but we just don't want to intake them via carbohydrates. So let's swing it back over to protein and fat. And primarily we would err to the side of fat because it is largely hormonally neutral.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
so
the
I don't have that
insulin. About protein on a long term will become a carbohydrate response.
So it's not as detrimental to the endocrine system when you're eating large doses of fat, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that does fantastic things on the brain issues, like people who have seizures, or there's kids that are autistic, or people that have had
epilepsy,
brain injuries,
stuff like that too.
I ignorantly factor that into carbohydrates are inflammatory.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden you take these inflammatory agents out of your diet, you're able to get to maybe somewhat of a homeostasis. But anyway, so with my response, just cutting the carbs out, it's not necessarily, people are like, oh, was that helping you lose weight or this? Crazy concept. I would just like to keep all my fingers and toes at the end of the day. So
that's a real thing, though.
Yeah. I've seen, as a practitioner, I have been on calls where a diabetic lady, she was missing from the knee down one leg and did not have any toes on the other and was pretty much bedridden and just consuming massive amounts of insulin. I mean, she took more insulin in a day than I consumed in a month.
Dude.
And anyway, so she was like complaining about all her diabetes. And I said, well, how long have you been diabetic? And she said 6 years. And at this point in time, I had been diabetic for 20 years. And it was just the first time in my life that I was so exposed to once again, the opposite pendulum of what people consider diabetes. Because that's what people consider as a diabetic. This is a type 1 diabetic, is missing extremities or being already considered having had a heart attack.
So I want to come back and then go into that. When did you join the fire department?
August of 2012.
Okay. And then 11. A paramedic as well? Mm-hmm. Okay, so...
and I became a paramedic in the spring of 2014.
So how long were you operating as a paramedic? So 4 years or 3 years? Before you left the fire department?
Yeah.
Roughly. Okay, so enough time to have been on a lot of calls.
Yeah.
I've heard this from a lot of I do know a lot of firefighters. My father-in-law's a firefighter. My brother-in-law's a firefighter. I work with quite a few guys on seminar staff that are firefighters. In your experience, what are the vast majority of things that a firefighter gets called out for?
80 to 90% of our daily calls are medical related, and not to sound bitter, but they are extremely self-solving problems. The majority of the calls that we are on are not real emergencies where someone needs us.
Okay. And then...
So you think about like medicine that, I've been on calls where someone said that every week or so they get just enough medicine from the emergency room or whatever to live for that period of time, and then they call 911 again because the actual idea of making a doctor's appointment, going to the doctor, getting a prescription filled, dealing with their Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is, I'm ignorant.
It's way too much than just calling.
Too much to handle. Call 911, they get a ride up to the hospital, they hang out for the day, and they get what they need for a week.
That's incredible. But that is par for the course from what I've heard. And then how much of those calls, how much are you dealing with diabetes as a firefighter?
Type 2 diabetes is pretty much a common thing for, most of America now. A lot of times the emergencies that we deal with for diabetics are going to be somebody traditionally is a little bit older. They might have recently started taking insulin because their pancreas was overtaxed. Mm-hmm. A lot of the medications that we give type 2 diabetics now takes a pancreas that's already has been producing 4 versus the 1. Once again, I'm making up fake numbers, so if anybody's ever going like, hey, she's an idiot.
Yeah, don't freak out.
Yeah. So they've been producing the 4, hypothetically, and their body can't keep up. So then we say, hey, your body can't keep up, so let's give it this medication that's going to stimulate it even more, because that's how you make an engine run more efficient, is you give it fuel that makes it run faster. So you now have this pancreas that's producing even more insulin with this medication.
Which makes sense conceptually, but is insane when we think about what is actually going on there.
Right. Yeah, so literally you are taking a pancreas and you're forcing it to work harder, and then when it stops working, those people have to take insulin. So that's kind of the progression of a type 2 diabetic. Once again, we talk about not fixing the problem and getting better. It's as the problem worsens, how do we respond to it? So on those calls, it's traditionally an older person who they're not educated in carbohydrate correction. They don't understand why they're taking insulin or what the insulin does. All they know is the doctor says every day they take 10, and they just take 10, and they take 10. And whether they eat or whether they exercise or whatever they do, they take 10. And we talked about my life is a constant ebb and flow and calculation. So if your body calculates and I calculate, but they don't calculate, that's where you're going to constantly run into a problem.
And this is an interesting topic, because if we were to break down general demographics of the United States, for instance, most of the people that are going to be dealing with chronic disease generally fall under like lower education, right? So now what we've done is we've basically given people a chronic disease that requires it would not be unreasonable to say a higher level of education in order to manage effectively. So what we've literally just set everybody up for failure. I mean, if you think about that, like it is a sad thing, and I don't think most people really grasp the severity of the type 2 diabetes epidemic in the United States. I think the CDC was predicting 1 in 3 before the year 2030, and I'm pretty sure we've already surpassed that. 1 in 3 diagnosed either pre-diabetic or diabetic, so 100 million Americans.
I mean, and to support that, diabetes type 2 traditionally was, they looked at it, a while ago, I don't know exactly the time frame, but they looked at it as an older man's disease, who they thought it was. And now we are seeing,
I think that changed in the 80s.
We are now seeing type 2 diabetics who are 4 and 5-year-old children. Type 2,
I think that's when they changed it from it was early onset, and then the first like child diagnosis was like 1979, and then they changed it to type 2.
Yeah, but it's just insane to me when you run across kids that are severely obese, and that is going to be your marker. They talk about in Dr. Richard Bernstein's book, he talks about the folks that, I don't exactly remember the measurements, but he said if you're an adult man and your waist circumference surpasses your hip circumference by this factor, and you are not the squishy fat that you can grab and jump up and down and see it jiggle, the fun stuff, you are the hard stomachs that it's just you have fat around your vital organ tissue.
So that is super, and I did not know, I knew it, but I didn't really know what the correlation was. And again, if in Dr. Jason Fung's book, The Diabetes Code, he talks about the difference between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat.
Yep,
and he
visceral
said,
fat is your evil.
Visceral fat is almost a direct correlation to all of those. He said subcutaneous fat has really, if we were going to boil it down, is it bad? The answer is no. It has virtually no negative effects.
Right. The sub-Q fat's going to be more like I feel bad about myself because I don't look good in a little micro bikini.
Yeah, but if you look at the visceral fat, so the fat around your organs, fatty liver disease, fatty pancreas, all that stuff, that is the stuff where if you're looking at somebody, you could just basically open up a human body, look at that and be like, this person is diabetic, and never test their blood, never look at anything, just be like, organs completely covered in fat, lungs, heart, everything.
And the scary part about that is it's never just diabetes. There are multiple diseases that are going to go along with visceral fat that they become like a trifecta, if you will. You're going to have hypertension, you're going to have diabetes, and you're going to have heart disease. Those are the three killing forces in the United States. Whether you're dying from a stroke, whether you're dying from a heart attack, all these things, or even just blood clots. All these things are the trifecta of what's killing Americans, and it has to do with diet.
Yeah, and we used to talk about that. They've changed the lecture a little bit in the level 1 course, but they used to talk about hyperinsulinemia is the precursor to type 2 diabetes. So too much insulin in the blood is what that means, and that would lend itself to what, I forget who it was. I should know this, but I think it's called the deadly quartet, but it's what you just mentioned. So hypertension, upper body obesity, glucose intolerance, and hypertriglyceridemia. And that's what I don't think a lot of, and people are not willfully ignorant. I think they just don't know anything about this stuff because society generally doesn't lend itself to hey, educate yourself about the horrific things that are going to happen to you if you keep eating like this. You don't just get type 2 diabetes.
It's a work in progress, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just, you're not, nobody just dies of type 2 diabetes. They die because they are type 2 diabetic, but then you find out they also have heart disease. It has a crazy high association with Alzheimer's, fatty liver disease. The list just goes on and on.
Well,
and
also,
on.
if you think about it in the simplest terms, your blood flow is what transports the hemoglobin, all the nutrients, everything in your body. So now, as a diabetic, if you say that you're, once again, an engine, and you put nice, clean oil on that engine runs smoothly. As they would say, purrs like a kitten. Mm-hmm. So now you have an engine with dirty oil. Your engine's going to break. And that same thing with the diabetic. My oil, if my blood sugar's high, is dirty because all that sugar causes me to now have plaque buildup. So now you're looking at people having blood clots or having an inability to get blood flow to things like your liver and your kidneys. Kills vital organs because your liver has all the blood in it. Your kidneys have to have blood flow through them to filter. And then your kidney disease, you're going to lead to having to do dialysis.
It's crazy.
Or, once again, blood clots leading to stroke.
Hypertriglyceridemia,
Yeah.
You just have super fatty blood, so it's higher viscosity, so it doesn't flow at the rate that it should. It's just, if you were to really think about it, if you were just to dial up one disease that you just do not want to get, it would be type 2 diabetes. But what I think is crazy interesting is that it is reversible. It's not easy, but we're starting to see it more and more frequently in the CrossFit community where people are doing it with what you found to do largely because you just grew up with what we would, because I'm kind of the same, because you're just indignant about taking direction from people. Mm-hmm. You're just I don't want to do that. That's dumb. And you're I think there's a better way.
Right.
And it sounds very much like you came to the very same conclusion that really the CrossFit community is pitching as well, because they had the same thought. They're this seems dumb.
Yeah.
It's not, the problem is not getting any better. It's actually getting worse. So why do we continue to trust that protocol? But correct me if I'm wrong. It's one of the, I think type 2, from what I understand, most people, and I would say most, like the vast majority, like high 90%, over the course of their lifetime, once diagnosed, will not take less insulin. They will only take more as it progresses.
Yeah, same thing with type 1. So
Really?
Yeah, the more you take a medication, the therapeutic effect becomes less. Case in point, you're opioid addicts. The first time you get high on opioids is the best high you're ever going to get. You have to take more and more to reach that same therapeutic effect. Same thing with insulin.
So how much has yours increased over the years? I would imagine it's probably much less than most.
It's a minimal, but that is also because of my kind of experimental cause and effect with what I eat. If I eat a standard American diet and be sad, I will take easily 4 to 5 times more insulin a day than I would if I do low carbs, just because of a need base.
What is low carb for you? What's it look like?
Like case in point, this morning I had 2 pieces of bacon, 3 eggs, and a half an avocado.
I mean, that's virtually no carbs.
Yeah. Or, I mean, sometimes I get crazy and throw some kale in there. But then, like, before I work out, a lot of times...
So I know you were saying that you tried eating 140, but that was too high, right? What, like, roughly, what are you eating now? Like, got to be less than 100.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my magic numbers is stick to around 80. Because even, like, before I work out, sometimes kind of to front load so I don't have hypoglycemia, I'll eat, like, a little Perfect Bar, and that has about 26 grams of carbohydrates in it.
Okay.
So that would be something that, as long as I stick to a meal that's less than 30 to 45 grams of carbs, which once again, I'm not preaching keto to anybody, but people dietitians world would say, oh my gosh, that's nothing. Because like even the diabetes, American diabetes diet, I believe that their average intake for a meal is like 150 grams of carbs.
It's insane. It's like, hey,
it's like eat a bowl of pasta.
Do more of what's killing you. That's what I don't
Well, I just think it's interesting when it says eat a bowl of pasta, but then fundamentally your body does not have the ability to process that pasta properly. It just doesn't have it.
And just so that everybody's clear on this, because like CrossFit gets a little bit of a bad rap for how aggressively it's pursuing this whole thing, and they're pursuing it because of that, because the guidance is so backwards on what people should do. And if you call, like, I had one of the people that I worked with, they're like, hey, I just called the American Diabetes Association just to see, and the woman on the phone was adamant. They're like, hey, you're going to have diabetes forever, so you just need to learn to manage your disease. And I'm like, that's what we're telling people, when 7 out of 10 deaths, 70% of deaths in America can be attributed to chronic disease, and 80% of healthcare costs are associated with chronic disease. Largely, we could all put in the bucket with things that are very closely associated with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we doing?
Well, and then you also have to, I mean, going back to a conspiracy theory, if you look at who the biggest supporters are for the American Diabetes Association,
Coke,
it's
McDonald's,
foods like Kraft and so forth that are like pushing processed foods. It's not, hey, Vegetables USA or whatever. And
that's CrossFit. That is their battle, right? So it's not. I think everybody thinks that they're like opposed to eating bad food. Like, we'll be the first. Hey, listen, drink that Coke if you want to. That's fine. We're not telling you not to do it. We are telling you, don't be fooled into thinking that it is somehow healthy for you. You know, like if you want to smoke cigarettes, that's great, but you're going to get lung cancer.
Yeah.
You know, and so that combined with the real thing that if you really want to get conspiracy theorists on people is what they're adamantly against is food companies driving health sciences.
Yeah.
And that is where it becomes to be very, very, there's a ton of conflict of interest. There is just, quite frankly, bad science. And then there's miseducation because of it. So that is really their battle. It's just like, hey, listen, we're not trying to fold Coca-Cola or any of these other companies. We're just saying it's fundamentally wrong for them to be
the check writer for.
Yes, for, like, is Coke good for you? Like,
Right.
Shockingly, I don't think that study would come out bad in Coke's favor if
Yeah.
they funded it. So that is really what the battle is.
If
It's
you would
not.
like to keep your job, Mr. Scientist, sir.
Yeah, if you would like another
to-
$5 million
Yeah.
for us to fund your research, then you should find Coke to be really good for
Wink,
you.
wink.
Yeah. So and I think there's a lot of people that just misunderstand what CrossFit's battle is, and that is what it is.
And that's what I wouldn't be the last person that says every diabetic should do what I do. I just know that what I've found to work for me, and I will gladly share that knowledge with somebody, is if I take the variables of carbohydrates out of my food. Now, yes, do I cheat up? I love chocolate. I mean, if you want to put a big old brownie sundae in front of me, I will probably destroy it, and then I'm going to have a terrible blood sugar and feel like absolute butt later. Feeling like butt is a technical term, by the way.
That is, yeah. Scientific.
So, but that being said, I know that for my every single day living, and whether it comes to athletic performance, because the higher my blood sugar, the more dehydrated I am, and the more dehydrated you are, you're going to have weaker muscles. So whether you want to look at it as a sports performance output or long-term health benefits, whatever it is, me avoiding a lot of carbs and a lot of processed junk, or just the fact of my blood sugar is not going up and down, and crazy concept, maintaining my overall ability to think for myself. Because when my blood sugar gets messed up, I can't think for myself, and that's embarrassing. So if I don't eat a ton of carbs, I don't need a ton of insulin. Therefore, I take out the variable of, will my insulin be too much? Will it make me low blood sugar? Am I going to take too much insulin, eat a huge plate of food, and then all of a sudden, or if you're trying to lose weight, I have to eat food again? I mean, I've done bikini competitions where I was 150 pounds, it's 5'10", and dieting all the time. And the most sad cow you've ever been is when you realize you've eaten all your food for the day, and now your blood sugar's low, and you're trying to lose weight.
What do I do?
Yeah, and your blood sugar's low, and you go, I've just ruined my entire day by binge eating for 20 minutes to get my blood sugar up.
Yeah.
Well, there goes that day.
What are some, so it would be my wish that more people that are dealing with both type 1 and type 2 would make their way into a CrossFit gym. I find that would very likely be the best possible thing they could do for themselves from a standpoint of like moving more and learning to eat better. You're going to learn both of those things in a CrossFit gym. What would be some hurdles that people that fall in one of those two camps are going to have to jump over?
Not asking for permission. Everything in our modern...
From who?
From your doctor's standpoint. Everything in our modern medicine world says, ask your doctor, ask your doctor, ask your doctor. I have never asked my doctor anything. I've informed my doctor what I'm doing, and I usually get them to kind of tell me that they're not comfortable with it, and then I still get my prescription and I go about my day. So, not that I'm, saying...
Yeah, we're not advocating that.
For people to fight, you need to be a bit more educated with what you're doing and why you're going.
You have the ability to do that because you have some formal education on what that
or
looks
the
like.
fact that I look at it as I've been diabetic for over 20 years, and some of the practitioners I've dealt with have been a doctor for 5. So I kind of look at it from a jerk standpoint at this point.
Also fair.
Yeah. So that being said, not asking for permission. If you are a confident diabetic and you're confident in your correction factors and you're confident in your ability to adjust your own insulin to food ratios, be comfortable with that confidence. I, as a diabetic and on the beach for 10 years, okay, you're out in the sun for 12 hours a day. Hot, sunny environments, tons of sweat, drops your blood sugar. I would decrease my insulin intake to almost a null factor. I almost took no insulin. I was eating just to keep up my just overall athletic output, or just the fact that I was in the sun all day long. And I was comfortable with that. Now, if you ask my endocrinologist, were they comfortable with me constantly changing up my insulin? Probably not, but I just informed them what I was doing. So that's how I have dealt with a lot of these athletic endeavors that I've put myself on. And if you want to become a diabetic in a CrossFit community or any athletic community, you have to be comfortable with there's going to be a learning curve. You're going to realize that, okay, I have to eat at least 12 grams of carbs and maybe reduce my insulin intake this much so that I'm not in the middle of a workout going hypoglycemic and then I'm falling on the floor and embarrassing myself. Or I have to realize that I can't eat the same way and not take enough insulin, or I can't eat the same way. And like I told you, if your blood sugar's high all the time, you're dehydrated. And then you feel like crap. You don't want to do the workout anyway.
Yeah. Are there any resources that you found to be beneficial over the years as far as just educating yourself? Or has it all been trial and error?
A lot of it's in trial and error with me, because there's no one diabetic resource and educator that's going to tell you how to solve your problems. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a counselor. They'll just sit there and listen to you and hopefully come up with your own solution. No experience there either. But
good.
But yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of like, I would always talk to people of like what the trial and error has been. Like I said, I've been very open with what I've done to with other diabetics, but a lot of people look at what I have done as being too difficult. But I'm comfortable with that. I usually don't choose things that are super easy anyway.
Because it requires a higher level of discipline?
Mm-hmm. Because even my dad, like, trying to train him to be a diabetic, like, he tried the keto diet, and we literally, with the keto diet, solved his DVT problem.
What's that?
Deep vein thrombosis is going to be blood clots. He was not getting blood flow to his kidneys, had kidney shutdown, was having major organ shutdowns. He was retaining a bunch of blood in his extremities where they grew like 3 times the size, because they have to have a return. The blood wasn't returning because of the vascular system.
What did you do to do that?
Once again, it goes back to dejunkifying his blood. I completely purged any form of carbohydrate or traditional carbohydrate, not vegetables and so forth, from his system. And the doctors canceled 2 of his surgeries, and they kept asking me, what did you do to make this go away?
Remove refined carbohydrates.
Yeah, literally and his insulin levels went down, his blood sugar drops, and being an old man and not being able to move out of your bed and all of a sudden having low blood sugar is probably one of the scariest things of your entire life, because you're trapped.
Yeah. Was he drinking a lot of his calories?
No, he was a snacker.
Got it.
So he would go and get some fast food, which once again we go down to, he was taking a ton of insulin for the fast food, and then he was low blood sugar, and he was eating in more snacks, and it was just a lot of the standard American diet stuff where he was constantly chasing a blood sugar, whether he was chasing the high with insulin or chasing the low with food, but he was chasing it. He was never on top of that horse riding.
It's super interesting that there's a lot of nutritional programs out there, and what most people would be well served doing is following some very basic advice, which is eat less refined carbohydrates and then probably up your protein.
Yeah, I mean, once again, like I said, the continuous glucose monitor, it's know what demon you're up against, because we all have our own. Mm-hmm. But if you take out the variables in the equation, it's a lot easier to solve the problem, because they'll teach you in any calculus class that you have to get it down to one variable. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't solve for X, Y, Z, W, and Q.
I got D's in calculus.
So if I start taking out the equation, all the carbohydrates, okay, what am I left with? Okay, then if I start factoring my fitness level in, or I lose weight and I'm not as resistant and I can take less insulin that way, whatever it is, just that healthier track is going to try and take some of the variables out of your life.
Just always a better option.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. This was as informative as I hoped it would be, so thank you. I just think it's cool to get your perspective as somebody who's been dealing with this for 20 plus years, but also having been someone who's seen it as a provider and seen it, what it actually is doing to people, and just what the devastation has in society, and then how you're dealing with it. I think it's cool. I think it's important for people to understand that.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all going to be about education. Everything that I've come across has been through a kind of selfish thirst, if you will, to kind of know myself better, whether it's fitness or whether it's weight loss. A lot of it had to do with vanity. The diets weren't working for me.
I mean, if it results in something positive, I don't know that's a bad thing.
Yeah. But that's what I experienced with patients, is they just accepted that was their lot, and kind of.
But I think that's because that's what they're told, right?
Yeah.
Hey, this is it for you. Like, you're just going to ride this out and try to manage this disease for the rest of your life, instead of saying, hey, let's see if we can, particularly type 2, see if we can get you off of this, or at the very least, like, minimize the effect it has on your daily life.
Yeah.
But that's not what they're told. So that's what we're trying to change. Cool. Two things. I've got a question for you, and then you can ask me anything you want. Are you a podcast or book person?
Actually, because of you, been trying to stay on the course of reading 10 pages a day of books.
How's it going?
Well, I've actually been pretty good at it so far. I don't know if books on audio count, though, because there's some days
Consumption of information is all that matters. Yeah. So
I've been pretty hungry.
I don't know
like
how you
the wolf
hear
lately.
10 pages a day. I don't know. It's probably way faster. And I may have talked about this before. I did audiobooks for a while, but I have found that my ability to consume an audiobook is solely predicated on what the person's voice sounds like.
Yes.
It could be the most amazing book in the world, but if it's like a
The
voice,
driest, yeah.
I'm just like, I can't listen to it.
Yeah, I just drove up to Maine and was in the truck for 17 hours, and I was trying to audiobook, and I had to take little 80s pop music breaks.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you have to bop.
Yeah, like some books, I'm just like, oh my God, like you should have had somebody else read your book.
Yeah.
Like if Morgan Freeman read the book, it would be amazing. Yeah.
You're like watching all the documentaries on baby penguins, and you're like, yes.
This is amazing. I had Morgan Freeman on my Waze app for a while, and it was awesome. Yeah, just having Morgan Freeman give you verbal directions while you're driving is pretty cool.
You felt super confident everywhere you're going.
Yeah, or that it was going to be incredibly exciting. Yeah.
God told me this is where I'm going today.
Yeah. And it was all from Clear and Present Danger. So there were these clips from Clear and Present Danger where it was amazing. So what book are you reading right now?
So actually, I've been reading my daily devotionals, which is a big book. I've had a new goal of no books, no breakfast. So you get up in the morning, you read your devotional, get your life together, and then you can eat.
I like it.
No books, no breakfast.
That's a thing. Hashtag everybody, no books, no breakfast. Hey, read your books, eat your vegetables, you turds. That's cool.
And then on audiobook, I had been reading the Dr. Richard Bernstein book. And then,
did you remember what it's called?
No, I didn't
Okay,
remember.
no worries.
It's one of those things. There's only so much I can fit in this
That's fair.
beautiful little brain.
No, I get it. Okay, cool. The last thing, you get to ask me whatever you want.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
God, man, this question.
Oh, is this something that happens to you on a daily basis?
No, but it's just something that comes up a lot, probably just because of the circles that I float in. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. There's goals, but I have yet to be able to accurately map out those goals. It's a running joke between Jess and I that I'm
Peter Pan.
at least. No, I definitely won't. No, I don't want to grow up.
Yeah.
I'm at a minimum 18 months off, left or right, on everything that we set down. So
there are worse.
all I know is improvement from where I'm at now.
Yeah.
In every aspect. So, life is going to change pretty drastically come March. We'll have a new addition to the family. So
You're getting a frog?
yeah, we're getting a frog. I hope he doesn't look like a frog when he comes out. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I would hope that our business would grow, the community would grow. We are contributing more, not only just to the members here, but also to the local community is something that has been really kind of rattling around in my brain lately. And just more of reaching more people, educating, and trying to facilitate, health and happiness to as many people as humanly possible. So, I don't know what that looks
creatures. Like. I mean, we are designed
100%.
to be community. So, informing and inviting and bringing more people in is definitely
that's the whole point of this
game.
podcast. So,
I have really forgot to tell you that I was really excited when they had the Faith as RX thing here.
Did you come?
I did not get to go to that. I was
Okay.
at a different event, but stuff like that excites me.
They do a good job with that. So I don't do anything with that. Not because I think it's just I was gone. So the more community stuff is better. I think it's always good for people to find their group of like-minded folks who push them towards good behavior and good attributes, the better. So, peer pressure is a great thing when directed in a positive direction. Yeah. So, cool. All right, guys. If you guys have any questions about this, go ahead and hit us up. CrossFit Rife on Instagram, CrossFit Rife on Facebook, CrossFitRife.com. You can find this on our YouTube channel and CrossFit Rife as well. Just CrossFit Rife everywhere. Thanks again for your time. That was awesome.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Do you know what kind of exit handshake we were doing?
Yeah, I don't know. We're just going to do this one. Turkey. All right. See ya.